At 1:47 a.m., I received the text that would change everything I thought I knew about my life with Eleanor. It was brief, almost casual in tone, but the weight behind the words was crushing. "I'll come home when I want." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no hint of consideration. Just a declaration, sharp and final. I stared at the phone for a long moment, my fingers frozen above the screen, the room around me dimly lit by the glow of my desk lamp. My heart raced, but my mind remained surprisingly calm. I had always thought I knew Eleanor, thought I understood her moods, her rhythms, her habits. But this felt foreign, alien. I was 39, married to her for 12 years. Or at least, I had been married to her, because right then, it felt like our marriage had been quietly dissolving for months, maybe even years, without either of us noticing. I remembered when we first met at a mutual friend's rooftop party in Brighton. She was radiant, witty, full of laughter that drew people like a magnet. I, Thomas, had always been a steady, grounded man. Not flashy, not flamboyant, but reliable. I worked as a civil engineer, loved numbers, structure, predictability. She had admired that in me, said it was rare to meet a man who could be dependable without being boring. For the first few years, it had been blissful. The late-night drives along the coast, the quiet dinners at our favorite bistro, the silly inside jokes we shared in whispers while the city slept. We had that spark, the kind that makes you believe life will never settle into routine. But life does settle. Bills accumulate, work demands intensify, friendships drift, responsibilities weigh heavier each year. I understood that. I always understood that. I had never expected fireworks every night. I had expected love, respect, and presence. But somewhere after year 7, the first cracks began to appear. Eleanor's laughter started to fade. The light in her eyes dimmed when she looked at me. She would come home from her job at the publishing house, exhausted from endless deadlines, and collapse onto the sofa with a sigh that seemed heavier each day. I tried to reach her, offered massages, prepared her favorite dinners, suggested weekend getaways, anything to recapture the closeness we once had. Each effort was met with polite disinterest or subtle dismissal. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe my humor had grown stale. Maybe I had become too routine, too predictable. But as months turned into years, the reality became undeniable. The kisses became brief, almost mechanical. The hugs were fleeting, lacking warmth. The intimacy that had once defined our relationship slowly eroded into occasional, obligatory moments. Every attempt to connect, every word of affection, was met with a wall I could not breach. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I loved her. I stayed because I believed in the marriage we had built, however fragile it seemed now. Then came the night of the argument. Or maybe it wasn't an argument in the traditional sense, but the moment everything crystallized. I had come home after a long day, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. Eleanor was sprawled across the sofa, scrolling through her phone, the blue light casting harsh shadows on her face. I sat down beside her, careful not to disturb her, careful not to provoke another wave of indifference. "Eleanor," I began gently, "can we talk?" She looked at me, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in exasperation. "What now, Thomas?" she said, her voice a mixture of fatigue and irritation. I took a deep breath. "I feel like we've been drifting apart. I miss us. I miss being close to you." Her response was quick, sharp, and unyielding. "I'll come home when I want." The words hit me like a cold gust of wind in the dead of night. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I simply stared at her, absorbing the finality of her declaration. For years, I had clung to hope, to the belief that love could bridge any distance. But that night, hope felt like a brittle relic of the past. I realized that I had been trying to resuscitate a connection that had been dead long before I noticed. I stood up, feeling the weight of years pressing down on my shoulders. My gaze swept across the living room, familiar yet foreign, each object a reminder of moments we had shared and lost. I packed a small bag, essentials only, and stepped out into the crisp night air. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors, no cinematic storm. Just the quiet, deliberate act of leaving. I drove to my friend Adrian's house, a longtime confidant who had witnessed the highs and lows of my relationship. He welcomed me without question, understanding that words were unnecessary at this point. The silence between us was comfortable, a balm to the chaos that had been my home life for months. Over the next few days, I navigated the strange landscape of a marriage suddenly turned foreign. Eleanor's messages came sporadically, demanding explanations, asserting her freedom, her independence. I responded with clarity, never anger, never defensiveness. "There is no home to come to," I typed once, feeling the sharp satisfaction of finally speaking a truth that had lingered unspoken for far too long. Every message she sent, every call she attempted, I met with calm boundaries, understanding that control had shifted entirely into my hands. The emotional power I had ceded for years was quietly returning. The strange part was how liberating it felt. Liberation did not come with elation or celebration. It came quietly, subtly, a steady awareness that I was reclaiming the dignity that had been eroded piece by piece. I could breathe again without expectation, walk without the constant anxiety of emotional rejection, speak without the need for approval. In that quiet, I realized something fundamental. Love, respect, and presence are not obligations one can demand from another. They are choices, and when those choices are withdrawn, the only rational response is clarity and self-preservation. By the end of the week, I had secured my own apartment, separate from the life Eleanor had once shared with me. I reestablished routines that belonged solely to me. Morning runs along the Thames, quiet breakfasts on my balcony, books I had neglected for months. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the love that had faded, relief for the freedom that had been denied for too long. In the evenings, I reflected on the years we had shared, not with bitterness, but with a measured understanding of what had been and what would never return. I didn't need closure, nor did I seek confrontation. Eleanor's actions spoke louder than any words could. Her insistence on autonomy, her declaration that she would return only on her terms, was the closure I had required without realizing it. The realization that the home we had built together no longer existed in any meaningful sense brought a quiet, sharp clarity. I was no longer a man chasing affection that was no longer mine to claim. I was simply a man, finally unburdened, standing in the light of truth. Weeks later, when friends asked how I was coping, I could honestly say I felt steadier than I had in years. There was still pain, certainly, but it was tempered by understanding and perspective. Eleanor had chosen her path, I had chosen mine. I had learned that love is not ownership, nor is it entitlement. It is fragile, sometimes fleeting, and it demands reciprocity. When reciprocity is absent, endurance is no virtue. It is self-deception. And so, at 1:47 a.m., when she sent the text claiming her right to return at will, I replied simply, calmly, unflinchingly, "There's no home to come to." The words carried no malice, no judgment, no spite. They carried only truth. And in that truth, I found the strength to close a chapter that had quietly been ending for years. I stepped into the night, lighter, clearer, ready for a life defined not by the absence of conflict, but by the presence of dignity, self-respect, and the quiet certainty that I had finally chosen myself.